Hi, Thomas. Glad to see your works. And let's break down your animations, or rather, concepts and animations. Let's start with concepts, and then we'll look at animations. I know that you've asked me about the design and specifically how to design and light, shade, smoke better. And for that, we'll have to take a step back and mostly look at the form in space, because I think shape-wise and uh, graphically, your designs look pretty cool. They work pretty well. And the things that we can add for the most part is the structure of the volumes in space. It's like creating something volumetric, something dimensional. And for that, we'll have to take a look at a couple reference examples. We'll have to take a look at different ways we can depict scenes and simplify scenes. And based on that, we can invent our own effects. And for that, I think it's important to both look at real life effects, understand how things work, and also look how we can simplify them, how we can stylize them in order to simplify the complexity of reality. And for that, it's best to use already existing animation effects. Generally, especially at the start, we should work with references a lot because we don't know how things look. Even if we kind of think we do, we usually don't. So it's good to gather enough like data, information, and visual examples of how scenes could look, how different artists tend to solve this task or like whatever, and the problem, visual problem, and how we can do the same. So let's look here. So the shapes are pretty good, color choices are pretty good. I really like the volume here, especially because we have a very clear structure. So we have this big scene at the top, which pretty much works like the form that is at the top, like over scenes. We have the form that is behind, and we have nice overlaps. So this is in front, this is in the back, this is also in the back, this is even more in the back, this is inside the shape. And then we have this shape, things that are directional and more sharp. And the only thing that I would push this to be directional because this radiates from the center and this doesn't, and it's not in perspective. So I would put it like this, maybe something like that, or something similar. So I would put it on a plane, on a curve, where these lines radiate from the center of explosion rather than kind of going from something else. And this is good because it also implies direction. It radiates from the center of explosion, which has a very clear kind of point where all the energy is coming from. This one is also pretty cool. I think it has a pretty cool silhouette. The thing that I would push is if I look at this line, the effect kind of goes in a straight line. So it goes 1 and then it goes 2, which kind of breaks the flow a bit. And the second thing, if we take this line that it creates, it kind of is a bit symmetrical. So design-wise, I would push it to be a bit less symmetrical. And maybe I would transition it a bit less sharply. So I would try to avoid making straight angle. And we can do something like this. We can do something like that. We can do something like this. But usually we try to avoid straight angles because it interrupts the flow, the natural flow of scenes, since, well, it's kind of like there are no forces that can take a 90-degree sharp turn. in nature, usually. So something like this would make more sense. So more directional here, then we can kind of break it up, break up the silhouette, and do stuff like this. So this would make more sense usually. To avoid 90-degree turn, we can just switch this and maybe rotate it slightly so it's not at this angle, but like at this angle. That's better too. So 1, 2, 3, then 4. And this is our composition. This would also work pretty well. Then we can be like, okay, so this is something like this. And this is either smaller or bigger. And both of them will work pretty well. They're pretty directional. So that's the biggest thing here. And the second thing here is clarity in volumes. So here it is very clear which volumes are in front, which volumes are behind, what goes where. Here it's not really that clear. We have a lot of volumes, but they're a bit more flat. They don't interact with each other that much. So this volume is a separate volume. It's not in front or behind anything. This volume is also kind of a separate volume. Kind of interacts, but not much. This volume is completely separate volume. It doesn't interact with anything much. So we can overlap things more, especially in the silhouette. So let's say we have this circle. So we first need to find the bigger structure. So what, as this whole mass, what is behind or in front of this big mass as a whole? So if this, all of this is in front, then there should be something in the back. So having some masses here. Now here, is this one in front or behind these two masses? So if it's in front, maybe, okay, this is a mass, then we push that and then it should overlap it. Is this one behind or in front? Let's say this one is a bit in front, then it should be the other way around. So this one should overlap and come on top, for example. Let's make the scale a bit different. So now maybe this one is also in front of this mass. And then there is something behind because it's in space. So there are always masses that we don't see because maybe there's this mass, this mass, this mass, and then there is a mass behind. So we'll see much less of it. It will be just this tiny circle peeking through. And we'll see a lot of this mass, for example, a bit less of this mass, only a little bit of this mass behind. And if we, for example, overlay something on top, then this will cover all of them a bit. And then maybe there is something behind it as well to create this volume. And that's how we get this. And so we do this, for example, and now this is in front, this is in front, and we follow the surface. So we create a surface and we need to describe it through details. So the details should tell us about the surface. And for that, we need to kind of stretch out these details around the surface, around like the lines going through vertically or horizontally. So wrapping around the form. And since it's kind of circular, the details will be more tightly packed on the sides and on transitions, and less so on the middle of the form. In the middle of the form, whatever. So stuff like this. So we need to create a clear scale. And we don't need that many color layers. We don't need that much stuff. But what we need is to make each of these bigger shapes count. So we need to make them different, we need to make them varied, we need to add some nice contrast. So maybe small to big, big to small. And for example, we have something like this. And then it goes here, goes here, goes here, goes here. Now, we need to describe the form. So we need to wrap it around the volumes. So here, it's rather straight. And what we need to do is we need to push these details to follow the form. So for example, I can kind of do a guide for myself. So if this is the volume, then our details should follow this volume to describe the roundness of the form. I'm trying to keep your general idea, but still rub the volumes around. And then we can add some smaller stuff to show that there are like volumes behind the form. So there is stuff that is overlapped that we don't see much of, but it's still there. And also we need to pick a clear direction. So here we're kind of looking down and we're seeing the top part of the smoke. And here, with the way you made it, we're kind of looking up and we're seeing the bottom of the volume. And so this in itself will kind of confuse us because here I'm looking down and here I'm looking up and they're in the same area. So I'm simultaneously looking down and up, which isn't very clear. So we'll probably have to choose. I'll choose we're looking down on the volume. So here I'll see the top of it, which means that I'll see this part, which in your case, we need to align. Basically, we need to draw ourselves a guide of how that would look like. So if we are looking, so this is the top. We can kind of imagine it being like this. So I'm seeing this. If I'm seeing the top, it means that I'm looking like this. So there are like circles and I'm looking down on that volume, on that circle. And so I'm basically describing the surface of that smoke through these choices. So is it the top? Is it the bottom? What am I seeing? And how do I express that? So in this case, I'm seeing the top of the volume. And if that's the case, well, I simply need to express that through details and form. So I need to make sure that this volume overlaps at the top because it's on the top, at the top, so it should be in front. This volume is lower, it's on the bottom, so it should be behind. And don't forget that the circle wraps around, so there should be stuff behind it as well on the sides. Behind what we see, there is more that we don't see. So this can be in front because we can still put stuff here, but there will be stuff at the bottom or behind it we don't see. Maybe here it gets sucked in, so maybe this part is at the top, but then here this part, the smoke is kind of at the bottom. It's not all that clear. So here, for example, we can kind of keep it, but indicate the volumes behind. And this part works because we use this as the reference point, so we're looking down on it. So this part pretty much works. We just need to make it less bubbly, less symmetrical, make it more stretched out in the direction of the motion. And then this is our round smoke, which looks good, by the way. So here is our smoke. It's less stylized. We can stylize it more, make it more graphic once we have the structure down. Now what? Now we can choose where is the light or like the dark is coming from. So is it coming from like the bottom? Is it coming from the top? Is it coming from the side? And then, for example, we can choose that and do, okay, so the light coming, or like the shapes that this layer shows, they come from the bottom, from this direction, and wrap around the volume, which we see this volume, so they will wrap around this kind of shape, this kind of lines. And we need to stretch our circles along the surface, kind of follow it a bit. And there are multiple ways we can stylize that part. So you can just look at the references and see how they handle the specific approach. There is no one single right one. This part is pretty much shapes and deciding which shapes do we want to use. Are they sharp? Are they soft? Are they bubbly? Are they more organic, more complex? But what we are describing is this. We are describing the structure, the overlaps, the complexities of its position in space through these shapes. And any of them will work as long as we are describing the form and as long as they are creating a nice, relatively simple and readable silhouette of light versus shadow. So it's best not to overdo how much these areas are broken up. Because if we look here, there is a very clear, simple, like very light, only very dark on transitions, mostly red here, medium color, here mostly dark red, mostly light red, mostly dark red, and only lighter red on transitions. Only this. So you can see that the light and shadows are grouped in big areas. And outside of these areas, it's mostly like one dominant color and the second used to describe the volume or describe the differences in like transitions. So it's looking out for stuff like this. But first of all, it's just making these big decisions that really, really matter. And then it's just searching for cool shapes and interesting design. Trying not to repeat stuff, trying to add some nice variety of big and small. Wrapping the shapes around these volumes. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just creating some separation. And then, for example, this is mostly this darker color with just hints of brighter color on transition between shapes. And that's the actually long and time consuming part. Actually designing all of these smaller thoughtful shapes. Choosing the amount, how much do we want to put here, how much do we want to put there. As they're creating a big, nice light and shadow silhouette. It seems like that. They come after the structure and big design structural choices. So here, the same idea. So we need to choose what's in the back, what's in the front, what goes where, and then we can push that structure. So the same with colors. When we use many colors, we need to try and make sure that colors have a ratio. So usually we want in an area or in the entire effect, we want to have a dominant color, which is usually like 50 to like 70%, maybe more, maybe a bit less, depending on number of colors of the effect. Then we have the secondary color, which covers a bit less, and then we have an accent, which covers even less. And if our colors have roughly the same volume, then they start to fight each other and make the form a bit flatter, because in nature it's very rare to have equal amounts of everything, and it also doesn't make sense in terms of how light transitions. So it makes things a bit confusing. So we usually want to have more clarity and dominance in terms of color. So for example, here we could make this light blue more dominant and only use this kind of like a transition or like an accent color to create some gradient, but not trying to cover the same amount. And it's also nice to use these colors to add extra form transitions, because if the color doesn't add new information, if it follows the same area, the same shape as the other color, then it doesn't serve a purpose design-wise. So we can do this stuff. It will be much more interesting because it carries new information and it also is more structured. Here we can make this area here more clear, more directional, kind of simplify it a bit and increase the contrast with the elements inside of it, creating contrast of sharp and smooth, and also create a contrast of like, this is mostly green area because it's so bright and so like energetic, it's so heated up, whereas there it kind of starts to cool down, so it's darker and it has all the stuff, and this creates nice contrast of light and dark in terms of big areas of light and dark, which is nice to have because it creates better readability and simpler structure. And in this specific case, it also breaks up how much thickness variation do we get, because here we kind of make it too even, and if I break it up, we get this nice variation that it naturally has. So doing stuff like this can really push the effect. Then we can push the silhouette even more, maybe add some extra elements here. Just one or two scenes really would be enough to push that energy and to make it kind of like there is a longer trail and then there is a mass, rather than the trail and the mass being similar in size. So having this stuff, just basic design choices. Then we can also make this more connected, because scenes need to interact, and right now this is like a separate shape that doesn't interact with anything, and this is like a separate shape that doesn't interact with the shape behind it. Now if we kind of merge it together a bit, maybe this kind of interacts with the shape behind it through like the light layer or through something else. If there is the silhouette, for example, kind of connects, or maybe it's a little bit raised or stretched out and it interacts with the shape. Maybe here we're implying that there is some volumes that we don't see, so it's not just this flat circle and nothing else. All of the scenes can make it feel more dimensional and add nuance to the effect. So stuff like this is very useful for writing like character. And you can also kind of make it smaller to push the contrast between them and really make this front one the focus, while also giving some good opportunities for variety. So again, I think the design, the shapes are pretty nice, and it's basically just adding this logical stuff and structure to it. That will make it even cooler, even better, and even more interesting effect. So adding that interaction, adding volumes behind, volumes in front, simplifying it a bit. All of these things are very useful. And you can keep the style, because the style is pretty nice. And generally it's a good, interesting effect. So it's just pushing the structure. With this one, I think it's also pretty cool. Again, I would make choices in terms of what's behind, what's in front, pushing the differences between colors. And here, so we need to decide the logic of our effect. So what what role does this color play? Is it a shadow? What is it? If it's a shadow and it's kind of like from below, from here, so we indicate it here and here. So it makes sense to indicate it here as well, because we kind of indicated it in other volumes. So to keep the structure makes sense and connect with everything else, it would be nice to have some kind of coherence and continuation of the pattern. So if the light is shining from the top, the light is shining from the top throughout the effect. And if we do the change of light, we show that through the area and not just in one spot. And then we can just push the shape so it's more contrast between areas. So there is smaller and bigger areas, light and shadow. We can wrap our details along the surface, add some nice transitions, make scenes simpler where we want, kind of creating a bigger structure. Unifying stuff, and then cutting in and creating areas of other colors, but carefully, and only in those places where it really matters. Because usually we try to make things more unified and then break it up a bit, rather than to make everything broken up and then try to unify it. Also, that's just a general approach. You can get away with doing things the other way around, as long as you make it unified to some degree at the end of the day. So for example, something like this. So I'm describing the form, describing this surface through these lines. I'm unifying, simplifying stuff, so it's easier to read. I'm putting stuff behind and also in front. I'm keeping more difference in this area of shadow and keeping this area of shadow limited only to the bottom planes of the surfaces. And this will create a lot of volume and clarity in our effect. Same thing here. So we just need to decide the role of the effect. Is it like internal glow? Is it something else? What do we want to do about it? And we want to overlap the circles more. So rather than making them separate from each other, we want to interlock them. So one goes behind the other, maybe something else, different size goes in front, so that they're interlocked, which creates an interesting structure. And this part is good. I think this is great. Here, I only think we should try and make sure that the distances here are not the same. So these parts are not the same. And I think that would be pretty much enough to make it quite interesting. Next up, here. So here, again, the same idea about interlocking and choosing how the surface goes. So instead of everything being kind of on the same side, on the same angle, we need to make sure that it wraps around the volume. So what's the difference? So if some things are just like this, then there are no forms going along. So if I do this, I do not express the volume of the form, because if we imagine stripes on like a ball, they go like this. Denser on the sides, more spaced out here, and they change the shape, kind of. And they interlock. If we like interlock different balls, they will interlock, and I will see something like this. And the further away it goes, the more they are interlocked and the less of the volumes I see behind. And here, this is a thing that we don't see as much of, which we can push. So here, this is a separate thing. It doesn't overlap much. This is a separate thing. It doesn't overlap much. This is a separate thing. It doesn't overlap much. So things are kind of in space, but they do not interact. Now, if I do this, for example, maybe this is in front. And then maybe there is a connection that's like in front of both of them, but behind these two. Maybe there is something here that's in front. Now this is a different story, isn't it? Now we see what's in front, we see what's behind, and I can add even more extra clarity to it. So we need to push these shapes in a way that shows the overlap more. And vary, design-wise, we need to vary these distances. Because I think generally the shapes are pretty good. The choices that you make are pretty good. It's just pushing these choices, making these volumes connect more instead of separating them out, and creating something more connected rather than several separate volumes. So for example, here, I don't know, something like this. So this is our shadow, for example. So we want to have some nice contrast, variation. And here we need to simplify stuff a bit, give it more variation in thickness, from thick to thin, from thin to thick. Maybe it goes like this here. So thin, thick, thin, varying the shapes a bit. And now for the light, for example, I choose something like this. I'm just using some kind of abstract color, for example, and I want to unify the shapes a bit. So this is stretched out in the direction of motion, and I unify this into a bigger, more interesting shape. Then maybe I interrupt it a bit with like something smaller, shorter. So trying to push the difference between these gaps, and I can do even more of that. So I want these gaps to be different and go in an interesting pattern. And I want these forms to be different and go in an interesting pattern. Because that's pretty much what makes my effect look like it, look like something. And then I want to create this separation between the volumes. And then I'm going, okay. So then there is a volume here, for example, it's on at the top, on top of this volume. So I create a shadow showing the separation between this volume and this volume. This volume stretches further here, but it's being pushed down by this volume, so we abstract some kind of part of it. And then maybe it's still in front of some kind of other object, some kind of other volume here. So we only see some part of it here, only a certain area of this circle, not the whole, but just part. And I group the shadows in like bigger areas rather than making them all separate. Maybe there is a shadow here, for example. Maybe there is a shadow there, and maybe there is a shadow here. So I just need to now create a structure of these shadows, varying the directions, varying the shapes a bit. Again, by the same principle as I showed you with the stripes on the ball. So the directions will change a bit as we go down or like to the top, because they show different sides of the circle, of the ellipse. We see some shadows here, we see some light here. So it's stuff like this pretty much. And we take that, and then if we really want, we can add some extra colors, but we have to be sure what it is. Is it the accent, or is it the colors that I want to fill most of my effect with? Or maybe in some areas it will be the dominant color, and in some areas it's an accent. Maybe here at the top it's a dominant color, and I fill most of the area in like some kind of design with it, wrapping around the surface. Maybe here it's just an accent. A couple stripes of brighter color. Kind of like a face. Maybe here it's most of the volume. And here it's kind of like an accent in the middle between the transitions of the volumes. So having stuff like this and clearly deciding the roles of each colors is also important. But for the most part, it's just deciding these overlaps and making sure that the shapes have clear structure. So this is in front, this is in the back, and it overlaps like this. This is in front of it, but it also is at the back here. This is in front of both, this is behind them. This is in front of all of them. This is behind this volume, behind this volume, and this is in front of this volume, and this is behind this volume. So we just need to make sure that we have this clear structure and that our shapes show that change, that structure change. And in this case, it would be, for example, pushing this closer down, maybe overlapping this more, pushing this a bit higher and overlapping it more with this one. Here it's making sure that this white, it's not ending right on the edge here, it's kind of peeking through and covering it. Things like that. And the same thing in the other ones. So we can just push this structure, making sure that it's different. So we are varying the sizes, varying the stuff, and make sure that the placement of our volumes is interesting. So here, and aligns to the surface. And we also show some things that are behind, because there are volumes in front here, but nothing is behind, as if we only see the front edges of the form and nothing else. So we can add some nice volume and some nice shapes here to show where does the volume appear from to begin with. Then we can push this out of the silhouette to show that the volume is forming. My English can't English. I can do this, maybe add some sharper shapes to show the indication of speed. Also, we can use this, which is more like liquidy. And then we need to decide. So right now it's kind of like all on the same line, and it's a straight line. So if we want a volume, we need to first place our volumes along the surface. So this is the surface. Then we cannot place them on a straight line, but we can place them on a curve. So if I just do that and put them on a curve, this will automatically make it more volumetric. If I go a step further and choose what's in front and what's in the back properly, this will give it even more volume. So now this is a scribble, but we clearly see the structure, and we can also add like a couple forms in the back. Just one, maybe two. And this will show us very clearly the structure. What's in front, what's in the back, what we're looking at. And that is really all we need. It's just the subtle stuff, the structure, and like the volume. In terms of the volume, so right now we're kind of going like 1 and 2, which is okay, but not the strongest silhouette that we can push. We might want to try adding some stuff. So I added a couple scenes to make the silhouette more interesting. So we had like bigger here, smaller here. We had like more of this diagonal. We had a little bit of a straight line, a little bit more of a curve to kind of push scenes a bit, and like this scene. So it's not just a smooth transition, but more of indication of the mass. So it's subtle changes here and there, and they accumulate into bigger changes. Here, same thing. We need to define our volumes and clearly decide their placement. Is this in front? Is this in the back? Is it combining? Is it overlapping? Pushing the silhouette. Maybe there's something like this here. Maybe there's something like that here. Just to show more contrast between big and small. And then I need to make choices. So where does the light come from? Where is it going? We again need to imagine the surface to wrap our lines around it to create a sense of space. And then of course it should also align to some kind of design. So that these areas are kind of creating a nice flow and are also clear and interesting. So things like that. For example, I think your stylus though works pretty well. It's just pushing these fundamentals. Same thing, we can simplify, push the interaction between volumes. So rather than doing this, we need to push our volumes closer together to interact. Rather than doing this, we need to do like stuff like this for the smoke. So 1, 2, this is in front of it. This is like maybe in front of that one. So we need to find this clear interaction, this clarity of like order. What's in front? What's in the back? What's going here? What's going there? What's big? What's small? What's medium? We create that structure and then it's clear. And then it's all about making it design, making its design interesting. Same thing here. I would try to find that volume first. And if it's more flat, then I would stretch the shapes more along the direction of the motion. Here in this one, I think it's a pretty cool smoke. I would mostly push the balance between colors, so it's more clear what's the dominant color, what's the secondary color. And we can clean up these curves even more. Also, it works like this already. Can push the differences in scale between these areas. So we go 1, 2, 3. They're different, but they're not that different. So maybe having a bit more contrast between these areas would be nice. Maybe this is longer. Maybe this one is smaller or bigger. So we just need to find a structure that works with our scale and the effect. So just pushing this base composition one way or another. And you'll be fine. So the same thing here. For the fire, for the volume of the fire, it's still really just overlapping these shapes more rather than making them like separate. So even just doing more of that as the other way around. Even just doing a bit more of that will already create a bit more volume because we have overlaps. And if we let it follow the surface, so rather than being a bit flat, maybe this is like this here, and maybe then there is the one that goes in space and it's thinner and smaller, and on this curve following the surface, creating that transition. Even that will add the volumes that we need here. So turning it a bit so it's on the side. And again, which one is in front, which one is in the back? It will overlap it and create kind of less perfect ellipse. It will be stretched out in some way. So just things like that really will add us a lot of volume. Then again, design-wise, we can push the ratios of shapes. I think general shapes work pretty well. So it's really just making sure that we push these basic principles even further. So for example, here it's pushing the ratios of the shapes. So right now we have some variation, but we can push the differences between them even more. We need some bigger ones in the silhouette and some smaller ones. So maybe something like this would work better design-wise, because we have now like medium, small, big. So more clear contrast between the elements. Here, I think it's pretty good. We can push some stuff, mostly like the distances like this, so it's not divided in the center. See, this is kind of divided in the center. And we can wrap the fire around the volume. And here it would be nice to kind of have a transition from one side to the other. So we can imagine it as like if you twist like a paper clip or like a sheet of paper, or maybe if you twist like cloth. So we go from here to the other side. So here, go to the other side, and then we see the fire here. So it kind of twists, and this will create a lot of volume, because here we kind of seeing a different part of the surface. So it will be something like this. So here we're seeing the top. It goes, transitions here, kind of behind the form, transitions to the bottom of the form, wraps around it, and transitions to the side. So we're showing the transition from one side to the other, and this already gives us a lot of cool things to work with. This is here, going there. I'll just very roughly sketch it out. So this transition by itself gives us a lot of volume. Because there is a direction change, and there is this idea of a twist in the form. Can amplify these differences. And push the ratio, so like light and shadow. Then just strategically play some nice negative species. And voila, we've got some fire. Maybe even transitions like this. Nose. So kind of turns rather than going straight. Turns from one side to the other. From this side of the form, goes back, swirls around, turns out on this side. From this side, goes back, turns out here. So like a folded piece of paper. Folding like this. Folding and twisting it a bit like that. So it changes sides. And then folding it again and twisting it a bit so it changes sides again. So it's imagining the structure in space and then following that structure will create our cool fire design. Yeah, we can even do that probably. Those kind of work. Mm-hmm. So kind of the same stuff that we can do with the other ones. It's also creating that clarity and pushing these ratios. Here, it's mostly pushing the differences between these two and like the space here, so that are a bit similar. So we can push these ratios and they're in the same spot, around the same size, and the amount of fire and light is a bit similar, although the light is more dominant. Here, it's maybe pushing more light here, so it's more contrasting light here and more red here, and then following the surface more. So right now it's kind of treating it like a flat object and running across the middle part of it. So we can transition from side to side perhaps to show the variety. Here again, it's maybe simplifying into bigger light areas at some parts and pushing the placement and position, the differences in between these shapes, like these shapes. For the water, I think it works pretty well. I like these shapes. In general, I think the design works pretty well. Here, I would just vary the thickness of the outline maybe a bit and add an indication of this going kind of like in front of the other volume. Like just a thing like that can imply a lot of like cool transitions. And then making sure that the colors aren't too equal. That here I can also kind of imply what's in front, what's in the back a bit maybe. Doesn't have to be a lot, but I think it's a really cool effect. Here, maybe there is more, so I would choose, is there more foam or more water? Because right now the amount of foam and the amount of water is fairly similar. Here, I think it works quite well. I would also push the distances. So 1, 2, 3, a bit similar. They have a bit similar lengths, each of these droplets. And we can unify them closer maybe at some point. So maybe there is an area where it's more blue, then there are areas where it's more foam. Same thing here. Maybe there are bigger closed areas at some point. And we might want to support these arcs. Water loves clear, smooth transitions. So maybe pushing it a bit and creating this big, long, interesting arcs, as well as pushing, like, I'm basically reducing the number of foam particles and the amount of foam so that the water stands out more. So I can do this stuff. And again, we can overlap stuff because right now it's kind of like a perfect ellipse. And it's entirely separate from the other thing, which can be a style. But if we want to create volume, we at least need to overlap them so they're not entirely separate things. Kind of one is more in front, one is more in the back, or maybe they interact with each other and then their shapes kind of change from perfect circles to like interacting circles where they're a bit more cut into each other or stretched into each other a bit more. And the same thing here. Love smooth transitions and some areas where it's clearly more water, whereas others it's clearly more foam. So I think this stuff could be cool. And on the other hand, your ideas are also a cool style. So I'm just showing you potential things that we can push. Here, this works fairly well. We can push the differences between these gaps. They're a bit similar in size. And the only thing, this doesn't fit it. So this is good. This doesn't belong here. It's kind of a separate element, which as a separate element works okay. We can again push the differences between these two in size and in placement because it kind of gets a bit too similar. And that's a TLDR, which is very long breakdown of the design. Hope it helps and wish you good luck with the animations.